aesthetics figure into Hegelianism. We have been graced with the presence of T Jump. Welcome. Nice
Hey,
to see you, and thanks for joining.
absolutely. So I've had a number of conversations with people who study Hegel and are self-professed Hegelians, and they usually argue for things like the existence of God or consciousness being fundamental. So my first initial question is, what about Hegel's epistemology and ontology differs from that of classical modern science?
Well, first of all, I'd say that whoever says consciousness is fundamental for Hegel doesn't know Hegel. That's just completely wrong. Hegel makes it very clear that the ultimate thing is logos, not consciousness. Uh, there's a way in which consciousness plays a part in that, but it's not the primary fundamental. God is also not fundamental in the sense that God is not a presupposition, but a conclusion. Uh, and so, Hegel's system, unless you understand God to be the system and not God, the representational being of, religion, uh, then it doesn't make, the representational being is not the fundamental one. It's God as the system is what is fundamental. And it's not even proper to say it's fundamental because it's not a foundation upon which there's something other. The foundation and what is founded co-constitute each other. So it doesn't really make sense to speak of it in these essential terms. This is why there's a difference between the concept and essence. As far as Hegel's epistemology ontology, technically speaking, Hegel does not see philosophy as working with epistemology and ontology. He sees it as working as pure conceptual reasoning, which does not have the problems of epistemology or ontology, because with epistemology, if you're asking, how do we know things, that already presupposes structures about what there is to be known in the first place, even if you don't explicitly do so. Implicitly, the very way in which you then go about knowing things already presupposes the structure of the objects which are to be known. Likewise, if you presuppose ontology, you're already presupposing a certain way in which they will be known, whether you posit it explicitly at the beginning or not. So in the Phenomenology of Spirit, that whole book is one gigantic reductio ad absurdum of epistemology and ontology at the same time, in which, with every chapter, we're shifting between epistemic positions, falling into ontological positions, falling back into epistemic conditions, and then seeing the whole thing as, well, this is actually something much more. There's something, not only there's something much more going on, there's something explicitly lacking here, which cannot be expressed in the positions that are being expressed. So I say at the end of the Phenomenology of Spirit, we get this whole thing of absolute knowing. And the absolute knowing is not an epistemic position, because in absolute knowing, the structure of consciousness is completely overcome. The natural consciousness is not there as what is driving anything anymore. What happens is absolute knowing is just the immediate position that in the entire phenomenology, what has been going on the entire time is that the knower and the known have actually been the exact same thing the entire time. The only thing that we've been knowing throughout the phenomenology is our own knowing. Every time we posit some kind of object out there, what's really being done is a projection of the structure of our own knowing. And when we look at the structure of our own knowing, what we're actually doing is a projection of the structure of the assumption of what an object is, such that when you get rid of that duality, what you get is something that is a self-constituting thing, but it's no longer a thing as a thing relating to consciousness out there, but it's a pure self-relationship of reasoning. So, at any point, quite literally, we have always known absolutely in the phenomenology. We just didn't know it. And once we know that we can't know in the structure of consciousness, and therefore the structures of epistemology where we have to deal with the conditions of subjectivity, once we get rid of that, the whole question just becomes, well, then what is reason? And, that's what pure logic is.
So just to clarify, when you say logos is fundamental, but consciousness isn't, are you saying like the axioms of logic? Is that what he means by logos? And typically someone would say like to have axioms, you would need like a consciousness to think about them or something.
No, these aren't axioms. They're not like axioms of any consciousness. They're just self-reflexive determinations. I mean, it's like a self-iterative mathematical equation, except the mathematical equation itself is not even given. So it's constructed out of nothing.
So when you say constructed out of nothing, you're saying it exists as some rule in the universe or something?
The rule itself has to generate itself. That it generates itself is the factual given. You exist already, blah, blah, blah. But figuring out what that rule is has to do with just actually doing the generation activity itself, without already presupposing what the generative activity is, which is why he deals with the whole presuppositionless issue.
And how do you go about doing that? Because my starting point is like epistemic solipsism. I think therefore I am. So the first thing I know is that I exist. What exactly is he saying exists?
He doesn't say anything exists. He says we're going to get rid of all categorical presuppositions. So we're going to get rid of assumptions and predispositions towards what we think is the case of anything, and what it even is to be a case, such that the only thing we're going to do is we're going to start with structures of the least assumption being just unrelatedness itself, immediacy. And we're going to think through this because, logic is thinking. That's at least the factual given. What thinking is and how thinking is a whole different issue, which is what we're not supposed to presuppose. So we're not going to presuppose it, or we're going to do it just because we can. So the issue is of meaning. It's more of a semantic in a way that, you're going to start with just like, okay, what is it to be in the first place? Well, we're not going to assume what being is. We're just going to give the structure of unrelated immediacy. Think that. You try to think it, you fail. There's a gap there between what is expected, even though you don't know what you're expecting, but you're expecting something. And the expectation that there would be something there and that there's a failure gives you a different kind of cognitive meaning towards leading you to nothing. Then you can stand back and see about this cognitive experience of failure to think, which it is, whatever it is, ultimately is, and you're stuck in this indeterminate loop between being nothing and back and forth, which then leads to a cycle of becoming. It's a very weird thing for somebody who thinks analytically, for example. Well, it's a very weird thing for anybody really in general. Continentals also can't make sense of it most of the time. But it's just a purely, I mean, if you want to put it in terms of semantics, that's probably the better framing. It's a purely semantic thing about what is meaning in the first place, such that through that we construct what reasoning really is.
And what is meaning in the first place?
Well, that's what you have to figure out. If you go with something that you can say, I'm going to not presuppose anything, it's unrelated. The meaning of that is, well, it's unrelated. If you try to think the unrelated, thinking is already trying to make relationship. You're going to be able to think nothing. This doesn't tell you what nothing is or that nothing is. It just tells you that this failure is what you call nothing. And then you stand back, you're like, well, this has a structure of immediacy again. Yeah, I've immediately done this. It immediately is there, which is just what being is. It's like constructing with Lego blocks. There's a certain kind of, these structures give you a very limited sphere of activity, what you can do with them. So in doing with them, what you do with them reveals what they are. And it's just back and forth of constructions.
You say unrelatedness. It seems like everything is necessarily going to be related in that it exists in reality, or it doesn't, or something along those lines. And
Well,
so,
that's
what
a
is unrelatedness?
presupposition. So it doesn't matter. Like it just, the whole point is that you're going to not presuppose what things are. Don't presuppose that things are. That's not even a presupposition. That's just a fact. You exist. You're thinking. To presupposition is simply don't put expectations as to what that is. So, you're going to say, well, I'm going to think, okay, well, what is the safest thing to think insofar as we're not going to get into trouble with, like maybe something snuck in behind there? Or we're just going to think of something that's unrelated, the immediate as such. Well, what can I think with it? I can't, therefore nothing. Well, at least the nothing is immediately there, so it's immediate. It is. So it's the same thing as being. It goes right back, and you just have this back and forth. It's a
What do you
pretty
mean by
straightforward.
unrelatedness?
Unrelatedness. It's basic English. It has no relationships.
When you say you think of unrelatedness, how can you do that? Like it's like thinking of nothing. I don't think it's even possible to do so.
Exactly. You can't.
So if you're supposed to think of unrelatedness, but you can't think of unrelatedness,
That's what nothing
mm,
is.
it would be a contradiction. I don't think even nothing would be a contradiction.
Well, no, that's what
Um,
nothing is. Like you're presupposing that nothing is something. Well, this is just saying this failure to cognize is what I'm going to call nothing.
and so failure to cognize is the fundamental, like, first starting point from Hegel.
No, there is no fundamental first starting point for Hegel. Like, the beginning at first is simply a pragmatic beginning of, well, if we're going to try to be good philosophers, we're going to assume nothing. We're going to, go with what at least seems to be the safest route of, the thing that's least assumptive, which is that which is unrelated.
What do you mean it has the least assumptions to think of something that's like nothing?
Well, it doesn't assume anything. I mean, like, I think you're getting caught up that you think that this is trying to think of something. It's not. It's just telling you a structure, and you're going to think the structure of unrelatedness, immediacy as such. There is no
And
thing called being that you're trying to think. There is no thing called nothing that you're trying to think. You're taking these structures of cognition, going through them, and insofar as you notice any differences, you're giving it new names.
okay, and so the point is that there just is nothing, and as you start of things, you're trying to assign connections between the things you're thinking of, but the initial starting point is the nothing.
Well, the initial starting point is just like unrelated immediateness. The meaning of that, if you think about the meaning, is just, well, obviously it's going to have no relationships. It can't be cognized. This failure to cognize, this failure to think is the next shift. It is different from the immediate immediacy, which, you have present as an object in cognition. So you call it nothing. And then from the nothing, you step back and you're like, okay, well, now it's back in presence of cognition again. It is what I don't know, but it just is. So I'm back to where I began, being nothing, being nothing. And then this shift, you stand back from the whole system, which you can't escape because it's objectively the case that insofar as you have immediacy, you can't think it. And in not thinking it, and you think about not thinking it, which puts it back into the immediacy that it was. This shift of being to nothing is exactly what people call becoming. So you name it becoming because it's a pretty good word name for it. And you just keep constructing from there on.
So could any worldview start with the nothingness or the unrelatedness and essentially just build this exact same worldview without any difference by starting with that as the starting point?
Yeah, I mean, as far as Hegel is concerned, he thinks that insofar as we're cognizant of the same kind of categories together, we're going to necessarily be thinking these things, and they have to be in this order. There should not be a different order.
Could the categories be derivative or emergent from something more fundamental?
No, because something more fundamental itself is just a thought determination.
Why is that? So, like, why couldn't physicalism be true where there's no matter
Because
or brains?
you're presupposing reason, and that's the whole problem of the logic.
Like ontologically, what would be the issue with that being the case?
Because you're presupposing reason. I mean, what sets up the distinction of the world and thought is thought itself, reason. If you say, well, there's something more fundamental than thought, well, how do you know that? That's a presupposition of reason. So how
Right.
do you
So
know
I'm not
reason has the
saying
validity? So, you have to know that reason has the validity to claim the truth. You can't
right.
just
So
assume
I
that
would.
reason has some problematic relationship to truth. Reason has to prove itself to itself. Then you could talk about the rest of the world.
So epistemically, I would agree we can't know that something else is fundamental. But I'm asking, would it be logically possible in some sense that something else was fundamental? Like, what is preventing it from being the case that physicalism is true? Because epistemically, we can start with Hegel's perspective. That wouldn't cause a problem, for example, for physicalism, because the fact that we can't know anything unless we think about it or label it or whatever, doesn't actually cause anything to exist or not exist. And so the particles and
Well,
stuff
no,
from the
but
Big
these are all
Bang.
presuppositions of reason. Like all of these things, physicalism is itself a presupposition of reason. You're going to say this is. I'm talking about the thing, yeah, but the thing is a presupposition of your own reason. You're positing all this.
Yes.
You have to prove it. Ontology and epistemology are not separable in this way. Insofar as you're positing an ontology and say, "Oh, I'm just saying there's just things." Well, yeah, how? You're doing it through reason, or you want to go through some epistemic procedure. Either way, reason is the one that's positing these differences. How does reason have validity to state any such thing? You can't state things about epistemology or ontology, which do not then get mediated by reason, such that reason is the place in which you have to prove these things ultimately.
Right, but wouldn't it be possible for reason to come about from something else? I can
Possibility
use
is the
reason.
determination of reason. I mean, that's what I'm
Sure.
saying. Like you're
Yeah.
trying to get segue out of the way, but all these things are just presuppositions of reason.
Well, anything I say, any words that I use are going to be, but the
Well, no,
point
it's
is
not
that
about words. It's the fact that you can cognize this is a presupposition of reason. If you say, well, what if there are things that are not cognized, but they exist? Who cares? You have to prove those things exist, and then, well, guess what? We cognize them.
Why do I have to prove those exist? Because the point is, if Hegel is right and he's saying that these rational things are the most fundamental thing, well, couldn't he just be wrong? Like, and I want to know, I care if he's wrong.
Well,
And
how would
so
you know that he's wrong unless you knew that
I would,
reason was actually the one that validates all things? And then you'd have to have a true theory of true reason,
well, I
which would
wouldn't
have to
know, but
be necessarily one-to-one with the ontology of your world.
I wouldn't know, but I don't want to know. That's not the interesting fact here. The fact here is, even if we don't know and could never know, couldn't it be the case that there is a reason is an emergent thing? It's not the most fundamental. It comes about from something else. And if so, would that make Hegel wrong? Was he making the claim that that was the case, or is he
No, so
absolutely
you're
correct?
misunderstanding reason as the human reason. That's not what reason is for Hegel. Reason is just determinability. If you say the planet Saturn, is so much miles radius, blah blah blah, that's not a subjective thing for you. Sure, fine, the metrics is subjective. We use feet or kilometers, whatever. But the fact that there's an actual distance, between the center of Saturn and its atmosphere, is just a fact. But it's a determinable fact that is rationally inquirable. I mean, rationality is quite literally what it says: ratioing the relationship. Anything that would be determinable in any way whatsoever has to be rational because it has to have these differences internal to its relationship. That's all that reason is for Hegel. Reason is not this representation in your head. The fact that the representation in your head happens to have a capacity to become self-aware and self-determining and self-checking and self-validating just happens to be the perfect mirror of the kind of process that we would expect given an understanding of absoluteness, such that the world is one world. And if it's not one world, it's two worlds, and there are two worlds in one world, no matter how many times you want to split it. And therefore, the world has to generate itself, and therefore reason generating itself would have to match the absolute self-generation of the world. So you can't really, to say, well, there's something more fundamental to reason, just saying, well, there's a reason behind reason. Yeah?
Well, so it seems like you're saying that there is an object like a particle. For that particle to exist, there has to be some kind of rationale or reason to make it coherent or something. But to me, rationality, reason are languages like English. Like English didn't exist prior to, I don't know, whatever year it was invented. And that's totally fine because reality particles don't care about English. They're not governed by English. English is a descriptor of the things. And so why couldn't rationality be like that? It's just a language invented by humans to describe things. Why must it be this more fundamental essence kind of a thing that for an object to exist and that this rationality must exist with it?
Well, I mean, those are your presuppositions. I mean, you can have them, but in order for you to have a proof of that, you'd have to then have your own self-grounding and reason to prove that this is indeed the case and conceptually legitimate. Because otherwise, you can just conceive any concept that we want, presuppose so many things within it that we aren't even aware of, and have discussions in which we're going to go nowhere because, well, here's my presupposition, here's your presupposition, and we never really even talk about the same thing.
Well, I'm asking, why do you like those presuppositions? Anybody can have presuppositions, that's right. But is there any justification for it, or did you just arbitrarily say, I like these are my favorite ones? So if
No,
my
it's
position, just to clarify, if my position is equally as justified a presupposition as yours, then they're equivalent starting points, I would guess. But I'm asking, like, is there a reason why you would prioritize yours over mine? Is there some definitive factor that would say, oh, it couldn't be the physicalist way, it has to be the rationalist way because of argument or evidence or something, rather than it just being a presupposition?
well, it seems to me that you're mixing up ontological and logical determinations here, which aren't the same thing. This is not a case of like, Hegel's not a rationalist in the sense that there is some kind of disembodied mind or whatever. There is no opposition of materialism to this idealism. They're not opposites at all. All idealism means is determinacy, particularly determinacy in obviously a rational whole. Rationality being just literally relationality. Insofar as you can relate anything, you have rationality. That's why I give the example of Saturn. So physicalism is itself a determination of idealism, in this case, as Hegel means it. So that's a false dichotomy. As for the reason why, well, the reason why is that Hegel can prove the self-rationality of reason as self-generative, absolutely. So there's no runaway of, well, there's always a further reason that I can then never account for. Now, whether you want to buy that is a whole different thing. But there is a whole huge argument in the science of logic to prove this. And it cannot be proven in this, simple abstractions of propositions of like, oh, well, if I give you A, B, and C, and therefore, D. I wish it was that easy, but it totally isn't. So you'd have to go see for yourself, whether you found this project to be leading somewhere that you found interesting, so that you would commit to actually going through it. Otherwise, it's just it's a hard thing to sell.
You said that physicalism and Hegelian idealism aren't mutually exclusive. That part I got lost on a little bit. So, because it seems like physicalism entails quantum fields are the most fundamental thing. It's all rationality is like English. It doesn't exist. It's just a human construct of the brain and nothing more. Whereas it seems like the Hegelian perspective is that rationality is more fundamental part of reality, kind of a thing. It's not just a language we made up in our brains. It's actually something more significant than that. And so that would seem like a contradiction.
No, because I mean, if you look at quantum fields, they're rational. I mean, they're determinable. You're seeing relationships there.
Sure. But the rationality doesn't
Uh,
exist in physics. It's just a
well,
descriptor.
no, I
So
mean,
it's like
like
language.
it's not a descriptor. Like the relationships are there.
I'm
That's
not
just a
sure.
fact.
Yes, but the
You know,
relationships
there's
are,
there's the atomic nucleus. There are the electrons. The relationship is there. That's just a fact.
yes, it's a fact that
Yeah,
is because of the
exactly. So,
physics.
and that's exactly why I say rationality for Hegel is just determinability.
Well,
The
the
fact that there is
relationships in
determinability there.
physics, the relationships in physics are physical facts. It's because it has this physical nature that it has a relationship. The
Right, right. And
relationships
there's
aren't
nothing wrong
fundamental.
with rationality being physical. Determinability of all kinds is rational. That's just all it is.
Well, the determinability in physics is completely secondary. Like even if something is never
Well, no, I mean,
determinable,
the fact that it is determinable is rational. If it's not determinable, then who cares? You're speaking
mm,
about nothing.
well, no, like there's in quantum mechanics, there's the position that randomness is fundamental. There's actually a randomness force which is undeterminable, and that it's impossible to know the momentum and whatever. I
Sure,
forgot
sure. I know
speed or
what you're talking
whatever.
about. Yeah, but that indeterminability itself is determinable. That's why we have field equations to begin with, and they work perfectly fine. So any determinability at all is rational. That's all that idealism means. It's not this opposition between physical and mental. That's not it. It's just determinability as such.
I don't see what the importance of determinability is here. Why even use the word? Why just say physics? Or just say like there isn't determinability. Say there is physical particles, physical energy,
Because
determinability.
physics is itself a determinable relationship between the non-physical and the physical.
Sure,
So
but it's just
physics is
that's just a
clearly
label.
physics is clearly not fundamental because it still has a relationship, which is a rational relationship. It's not what is built on, but itself is built up from. I mean, below field equations, we still have notions of causality. We still have notions of what it is to be an object. We still have notions of conceptuality. We still have notions of essentialities. These are just structures of any object whatsoever, physical or mental, of any kind. And you can't take atoms and electrons and build those things out of those. That doesn't mean anything. It's those things which are conceptually built off lower elements, you know.
Yeah, I see it the other way. I see it that rationality, delineations, those are all built by particles, physics.
Well,
I think that's the
you
consensus
can't,
among
can't build
physicists.
cause and effect from atoms.
Sure, you can. Why not?
No, you can't.
Why not?
Prove it.
Well, you're presupposing you can't
Well, I know you can't. But
based on
we're
what?
gonna we're just gonna get into a whole like my presuppositions versus your presuppositions. Insofar as we're having this discussion in abstraction, what I'm presenting is indeed presuppositional in that presupposes my positions. So we're just gonna get nowhere with that. I suppose that's kind of the end of that train of thought.
Well, it's the point is that in physics, everything is made of physical stuff. The relations are all subservient to the physical stuff. It's all particles all the way down, essentially,
Right,
and
right.
that
My
seems to
point
be a
is that
hard.
those things, and my point is that those things are themselves determinable by other things. You can't determine those things without having a determination of objectivity, of essentiality, relationships of identity, of difference, of ground and grounded. These things already go before you even get to a physical object. So, logically speaking, it's a no go. It's just blatantly false that, those concepts are built from those things. That doesn't even make any sense. Uh, it makes sense if you don't think about it. But if you try to conceptually explain what is going on, those come before. You can't explain field equations without a concept of objectivity. I mean, this is a very basic Kantian thing.
Right, but I can explain objectivity as a concept in the brain.
Right, but the brain
So,
is itself a concept determined by your aspect of reasoning. So you still have to explain reasoning as to why reasoning has any validity whatsoever.
right, so it seems like my perspective, what you're saying is that if we can label something or imagine something, then that thing has this quality of rationality to it, and therefore the rationality must be basic to all things that can be imagined. To me, that seems no different than saying, well, I can label something with a word, therefore words must be fundamental to all things. And
No,
clearly
I'm
that's
just saying that
false.
anything determinable, it's not about my labels, it's the fact that things are determinable at all. You don't
How's
have
that
to
different from
label a
my word
triangle
example?
triangle. Well, no, you don't have to label a triangle triangle, for example. The triangle has objective properties that whatever you want to say about it, it's going to have those no matter what. On a 2D plane, a triangle has 180 degrees some angles. You can subdivide any triangle into a right triangle, which is subject to the dynamics of the Pythagorean equations for the hypotenuse. That's just a fact, consequent to the construction itself. Uh, that's not my subjective labeling. That is what a triangle is. You can call it whatever. You can give it any name. That's not the problem. The problem is that a certain determination is a certain relation, and a certain relation has a specific consequence. You can only stick the Lego blocks together in so many ways, objectively. You can believe anything else you want, but objectively, you can only stick them together in one certain way.
I would agree, but I'd say that's because of the fields of physics, not because of relations, but that's because of the fields of physics. And
Which
relations,
are relations. I mean, like we're getting to linguistic things here. It seems that
well, this is the
perhaps
part that I
the whole
disagree with. Like,
barrier.
they are not relations. They are not relations. Relations are the things we add to them. We say they relation things, but no, those don't exist. Those are words we make up. They are physics. They are fields, and relations don't come until after the fields. The fact that I can label it a relation doesn't make it somehow
That's not a
fundamental any more
label.
than
I mean, like a field is already a relationship.
it's a label, which is, yes, in our
No, it's not
language,
a label. A field, okay, if you define a field, the field already is relational.
that's because we've defined it. That's a word. We've given
No,
it a
it's not
label.
defined it. It is relational.
I'm not
You can't
sure
have
what
a
you're
field that
saying.
isn't related. So
Right, but that's like you say, you can't have an object that you can't describe with a word. Related here is
no,
just
no.
that
Okay,
we
see, hold
compare it.
on. Can you please stop doing that? I've already told you multiple times. My position is not to do with words. So please stop projecting that position from me.
Well, no, I'm
I
not
mean,
projecting.
otherwise
That's
we're
the
going
question.
nowhere.
The question is from my perspective, I see no difference between your position on relations and my analogy with words. I'm not accusing you of this. I'm trying to figure out why yours isn't this, because as far as I can tell, I can't see any substantive difference between the two.
Because the descriptions being given are of the relationships themselves. It's not first, it's not like definition first and then go look for it. No. These are actual relationships already enacted, which your language is merely being used pragmatically to track. The language is not the source of meaning, it's the thing itself.
Right, I understand what you're saying there, but that's why I brought up the initial example of asking, can an object exist prior to rationality and rationality be emergent from that thing or whatever? And you didn't really give a no there.
No, I did answer. I said, you're mistaking rationality to be this representation in my mind. That's not what rationality is. Rationality is determinability.
How is that not a relationship in your mind?
Because Saturn has the radius it has, whether I think about it or not. That's just a determinable fact of how it is.
I
It has a
just
certain
leave out.
positionality within. It has a certain positionality in the solar system. It has a certain positionality in relationship to its moons. Whether I give it a number, whether I give it a name, has nothing to do with it. That's just the existential fact. Now, it seems that you just have a problem with that. The word relational brings up connotations for you that doesn't bring up for me.
Yeah,
Well,
to
sort of.
jump
I
in,
just
comment that a field is just as much of a label as relational. And how do you respond to the allegation that you're pulling a sort of greedy nominalist?
where was that?
Oh,
Well, basically, it sounds like they're
sorry.
saying that you're
Uh,
both special pleading your own positions.
Well,
yeah,
I'm not arguing for a position here. I'm just asking questions. I'm not specifically saying there is
yes,
one
sir. I just
truth.
wanted to clarify my statement. So what I meant to say was, if we're gonna say, oh, relationality, we came up with that. That's a concept we have. We just apply that to what is. That supervenes on the fundamental. Well, it seems to me if you introduce some category like particle or field or atom, it's just the same thing all over again. That's also a category we came up with, right? The question is not what is the content of these categories, but in fact, do these categories carve nature of the joints? And merely presupposing my categories do and yours don't, well, that's just kind of greedy in a dialectical sense, right? That's just kind of not taking my interlocutor's position seriously. Um, so yeah, that's what I mean. Like, why should I? Let's say I'm just a pure skeptical nominalist. Why should I take fields or particles any more seriously than God or the soul or relationality?
Well, that's kind of exactly my point, is that if you're assuming rationality is the basic thing, and I can propose this alternative that particles are the basic thing, why are you excluding that? That's the question. And the fact that you can label it, or that you have some relation that you think can be applied to describe that thing, okay, but that doesn't mean that it's not, that the relation must pre-exist to the particle. So that's the whole point, is that it seems like the Hegelian position is presupposing its own ontology, that rationality is basic because you can describe things with rationality. And I'm like, well, is there another reason somewhere?
Do you understand that what AW is describing in Hegel is not some kind of mythical realist position about the fundamental nature of the world?
No, I don't understand that.
Yeah, that's going to be the problem, right? What he's trying to explain, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but what he's trying to explain is that the way that rationality for Hegel, right, is going to be quote unquote fundamental, right, is that we're only going to know, according to Hegel, about the world, right, through the picture that we construct of it in investigating the object of experience, right?
That's epistemic solipsism. So epistemology, I can
No,
I'm
it's
fine
not
with
epistemic solipsism. It's called constructivism.
epistemic solipsism. So you think and
No,
you
it's
learn from the
constructivism.
thinking.
That's
You
not what I
saying it
said.
again doesn't make you right on this one. So
Well,
I
all you
understand
did was say it again.
epistemology. I did epistemology.
No, you don't understand epistemology.
All right, that seems to be kind of an irrelevant debate, quite frankly.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, you weren't too far off, Piper. I mean, yeah, it is constructivist, but it's not merely constructivist. There is an objectivity to it.
I agree.
Yeah, I just think we're probably having a linguistic missing each other's points here, I suppose. We're just speaking a very different set of languages.
Yeah, that could be.
Although,
I mean, yeah, sorry.
I mean, although if I can answer then to the specific thing about like presupposing relationality, no, you don't have to presuppose. As a matter of fact, that's what exactly the being nothing thing is for. I try to think the unrelated, and yet I find I have the relationship to the being and nothing. The expectation of the immediacy which is and the immediacy which is not. And from this, relationships just happen to necessarily arise. Insofar as the thing is in itself, what is in itself is just simply not being another, and this itself then posits relationality necessarily. And likewise in relationality, you need the immediacies which are unrelated. That insofar as you have relationships or being for others, Hegel calls it, you need to have the being in itself. You need to have the immediacy which is unrelated to the other. But the unrelatedness is it's already posited in being unrelated as not being that which is the relationship, which relates it to the relationship. These are conceptual riddles of sorts, dialectics, as he calls them, in which positing these categories is going to lead you into a whole issue in which the metaphysics of atomism, so to say, and the metaphysics of pure relationality, like something like Buddhist emptiness, are two sides of the exact same coin. They're not independent of each other. They can't be stated independently. They come together, and that's where something like determination would be the solution for Hegel, where determination is that which has both immediate being in itself, but also the immediacy of relationship, which is in itself. So it is an independent in itself, but it's also relational at the same time, necessarily. It is contradictory, but that's how it is.
So you said Buddhism and materialism can be conjoined through the dialectic, and why would you want to do that? Like, why wouldn't you want to say they are different things and one is potentially more accurate than the other?
Well, it's not why you would want to do that, but that would presuppose that you're trying to construct an argument towards something. Hegel's not constructing an argument towards anything. He's just saying the way things are coming together.
What does he mean by coming together here? So, like, they're coming together in that you can both use rationality or words to describe them, and they're coming together in what sense?
Coming together of their own account. It's like the thing, like with being and nothing. I don't know how I can set it more simply, or the being in itself. But insofar as you have a being in itself, the understanding is that it's not another. In order to say this thing's independent, it's independent from a dependency. That's just logically what's happening. You can't make sense of this without having that other meaning entailed in it. There's a way to see this in which like all the meaning is literally just a negation of that other meaning. And so the other meaning is what grounds it. So you go from like that which is immediately just self-contained to that which in which it's a relationship, at least to the unrelationship. And then itself points right back to the things which are supposed to be unrelated, because you can't have relationships without things which are unrelated to begin with, which have an independent being. So you have the independent atom and you have the relationships tied together just necessarily. The very meaning of them, to think about them, requires it. And this is not some kind of new insight. Quite frankly, plenty of people in history have discovered this. Someone like Nagarjuna discovered this, for example. A lot of the Hindu logicists, logicians discovered this. As a matter of fact, that's why they were skeptical about reason. This is why people thought that there was something more fundamental than reason. They're like, well, reason can't make sense of of the world because reason has these contradictions. They don't even make sense to reason itself, and they're just necessary. You can't escape them.
Oh, so there is something more fundamental than reason?
No, I'm saying that they had the reason to think there was something more fundamental reason because they saw these contradictions. And so they thought, well, reason seems to be hamstrung here. You reach these limits in which, reason doesn't make any sense anymore because it's literally staying a contradiction.
Do you disagree? You say that the contradiction is okay?
Yeah.
Is there an advantage or something we can do if we adopt this ideology that we wouldn't be able to do under a different ideology?
You can make more sense of things. I mean, like I said, in abstraction, all this stuff doesn't really seem to make any sense. And I myself actually profess this to people who want to learn about this, and they're like, I want to learn about this because I think I'm going to do something with this. To which I respond, you're not going to do anything with this. There's no way to think dialectically about cooking your breakfast or running your organization or teaching your kids. You do that with regular old thinking. You don't need philosophical thinking for this kind of thing. This kind of thinking is specifically only to consider pure categories, nothing else.
And which categories does it make more sense of than science or classical philosophy?
Well, science doesn't make sense of categories, so that's sort of nonsense. Insofar as it makes sense of stuff in classical philosophy, it makes sense about them in the same way they did. It just goes and shows that they are necessary connections, which were not considered by many people. There were some people who did consider them, and which you can show that this is just the necessary structure of these concepts. And people who looked at it and said like, oh well, there's a contradiction here, and therefore there stops the buck. We give up on reason. Hegel says, well, we don't have to. Why would we? Sure, the thing shows up to be self-contradictory in that it it turns into its opposite or entails its opposite or is immediately self-inverting at the same time with its opposite. Why is that a problem? We can keep thinking. There is no issue. The fact that you notice that being and nothing are stuck within a loop turning into each other doesn't mean anything. We can think further because then we can say, well, we know that this actually does make sense. We have a concept for it, becoming. And then becoming itself has ceasing to be and coming to be. And those itself lock up into a different determination of existence. And existence itself also has been to lock up within determinacy and quality of reality and negation. Where in order to be real, you have to be distinct from the negation, and therefore you negate the negation. Therefore, you're actually just nothing but negations. But the negation itself stands its own relationship to itself as the negation of the reality, which is its negation. Therefore, it itself is real. And you get that out of that. The whole system is what something is. It's a qualified thing or a qualified quality in a way. The whole thing can keep constructing. There is no problem. So, for Hegel, it's like, well, contradiction is a big, so what? Yes, there is a contradiction, and so what? It doesn't stop us from thinking. We can still keep thinking. So we do.
So is he saying there are literally P and not P kind of contradictions, true contradictions?
Not of that formal kind, no. Like, insofar as A is A really is A. But logically entailed to that is also the non-A, to which the A as identity is being distinguished. So, in the very fact that you say A equals A, there's a distinction. You're using difference to loop back and re-identify A with A in the proposition of A equals A. Somebody might then go and say, really, difference is really the fundamental thing. It's not actually identity. But then in order to get the identities, in order to get the difference, you need the identities which separate. So these are contradictions, but there's no problem with that. If you specify that in this moment, this thing is in this identity moment, that's perfectly fine. In another moment, it's in the difference moment, and that's perfectly fine. And you'll get positions in which both things will happen at the same time, like becoming. Becoming is both being and nothing at the same time to the same extent. It's not more being or more nothing. It's both being and nothing at the same time to the full extent. So, that's a contradiction in the sense of, P and not P, I suppose.
So does that mean there are or not true contradictions? I'm lost.
Depending on what you mean, yes, but also no. Because from one side of the process, a thing can be contradictory, but from another side, it's perfectly reasonable. If you just think the dialectic of being and nothing, from within, there's no problem. You think the immediate, you fail to think. You think about your failure to think, and you're back to thinking, or back to thought, really. From within, it's just one sequence of events, which there's no problem. You're just thinking through it, thinking about it, thinking through it again. It's only from standing back as a whole that you see, it's actually both these things at once. Then it's contradictory.
Do we want that in a system? Wouldn't we prefer one that doesn't have any contradictions?
Why wouldn't you? I mean, like Hegel's whole thing is like, well, people just presuppose that there's something wrong with contradiction, but we can work with it perfectly fine, and it's just true. Like the structure of immediacy leads to an incapacity to draw anything out of it, which itself leads to the absence of the thing itself, which is a nothing. That's just the conceptual fact, if you want to call it. So it's not like whether I want it. It's not whether I want it or not. It's just the case. So you're going to deal with it.
It's because you said that the benefit of adopting this ideology is that it makes sense of things or helps people understand things. And it seems like a system that adopts contradictions does the opposite of that. It makes it harder to make sense of things and harder to understand things. And so if we're looking for an ideology that does help people to understand things better, one with contradictions seems to be counterproductive towards that goal.
Well, I can see why you would think that from the outside, but if you actually went through this, it's perfectly reasonable. It makes more sense than anything I have ever encountered. Most of the things that I read nowadays, which tends to be usually ancient philosophy and just German idealist stuff for the most part, occasionally some other people, it's the same things. Whenever people are thinking truly, they cannot help it. Like they literally cannot help it no matter how they try. They arrive at these same exact contradictions because it's just what they really are. You can couch your definitions however you like, and people have tried to death. You have the fundamental problems of skepticism, which skepticism always pulls up, of the self-contradictions of the fundamental positions of philosophy. So you got to deal with it, whether you like it or not. The fact that you bury your head and just eschew the issue and pretend like a lot of people said, well, I'm just going to grab this horn of skepticism and go with it, as if that's the solution, which it's not. It's just turning a blind eye to the whole issue. Well, sure, if you want to ignore the issue, can't stop you, but if you actually want to solve the philosophical riddles, you got to deal with it.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I like the particle physics model, because particles don't have contradictions. We can have our language and our rationality can have contradictions in ways that we describe reality, but reality doesn't have any contradictions if it's just particles. And so I think that is a more parsimonious way to address reality in a way that makes sense without the contradictions.
Well, there's plenty of contradictions with particles. The whole being and nothing, the whole being in itself being for other, they are related. There's no atomism without relationships. As much as you want to think that there is, you're not really thinking if you think that there is. I mean, like quantum mechanics is full of a bunch of nonsense, quite frankly, like quantum superpositions and all that jazz. I mean, if anything, I would think that somebody who believes in modern physics would be quite comfortable with contradictions, because most of it is contradictions of the bad kind, quite frankly.
All right, that's it for my questions.
Thank you so much, TJ. It was awesome to hear from you. I hope this was as awesome and entertaining for you as it was for me. Looking forward to the next one.